Today, I'm going to be covering the Sage Fixed Asset Solution, with the primary focus being on the depreciation module. Now, the Sage Fixed Asset Solution is comprised of 3 modules and custom reporting. The 3 modules are the planning module, which handles CIP or in-progress type projects, which can then result in assets being sent directly to the depreciation module to start depreciating. And of course, the depreciation module, where you can handle all of your depreciation calculations for tax or GAAP, state, AMT, or ACE books, and be able to calculate all of your depreciation requirements for your fixed assets. The tracking module is used for handling physical inventory of your fixed assets and being able to generate reports identifying any assets that are missing. The custom reporting features incorporates a fully integrated version of SAP Crystal Reports so that you can create any type of ad hoc reports to meet your advanced requiring needs. Now, let's go into the depreciation module and take a look at how that handles all depreciation requirements for fixed assets. The asset snapshot you're viewing on the screen right now, this is a quick report that can be run or automatically launched when you open a company, or you can manually run this at any point. This gives you a really good overview of what's going on with the fixed assets in the company that you have opened. This information can be viewed by any of the books. And of course, if you have a different cost basis between tax and your internal book, you will actually see the numbers calculate on the fly accordingly. This is also one of the first places you can see what's placed in service by quarter. So if, for example, you're doing maker's depreciation for tax, this is the first place you can see if you've exceeded 40% of the assets being placed in service in Q4 and need to do a mid-quarter convention switch, which I'll demonstrate in a few minutes. There is also a dedicated mid-quarter applicability report that you can run, which will break down your Q1 through Q3 placed in service versus your Q4 percentage placed in service. And then you can easily do a mid-quarter convention switch. You can also see here a quick comparison between acquired value and accumulated depreciation. You can look at your 5-year spend, and you can also look at a breakdown of remaining life by percentage. So you can create many companies in the system. There's no limit on the number of companies you can create. And within our solution currently, there are 7 books. So you have your tax book, internal, state, AMT, ACE, and 2 custom books. Your state, AMT, as well as the 2 custom books can be renamed to anything you choose. You can also turn off any of the books you are not using. The system does support short years, and you can also specify any book overrides here in the solution. Now let's take a look at the asset list view. This is showing all of the assets in my company, but I can certainly create groups based on location, value of assets, place in service date, anything I choose as a filtering mechanism for creating any types of groups. That may come in handy, for example, when doing something like a property tax report, if you want to be able to just report on a particular subset of assets. This view is easily customizable. You can choose what fields you want to be able to see, what sequence you want to see them in, and you can also directly export from this view out to Excel. Let's take a look at an asset detail. So if you take a look at all of the fields up above, these are your general information fields. All of these are customizable. You can rename these fields anything you choose, and this is where you'll capture things like your GL account info, the description of the asset, maybe the asset location or department, and your asset classes. Now, keep in mind that the asset classes defined here are user-defined and are separate from your IRS property types, which I will go over shortly. You'll certainly want to capture things such as serial numbers if you're capturing IT assets or serialized assets, or you may want to capture things like VIN numbers if you have vehicles as fixed assets. To customize these fields, you can easily click on Customize a Field here on the left. And for example, where I clicked on my GL asset account and it populated a list of all of my accounts, that's all user-defined. So I can certainly create my list of GL account numbers, or I can actually have it auto-fill. So for example, once I first import my assets into the solution, I can turn on my Smart List Manager, just hit fill, and it's going to populate each unique entry it sees in that field. All of the fields that I stated, you can rename them what's chosen. So for example, my custom field 6 here has been renamed VIN number. These standard fields will take 25 characters. Your description field will take 80. The GL account field will take 100 characters. The asset ID field will take up to 50 characters. This is the field that would be used, for example, with the tracking module when you're doing a physical inventory. The asset ID number displayed in that field is what would actually translate to a barcode, which I'll cover when I go into the tracking module. The Transactions tab will capture any type of disposal, be it full or partial, as well as transfers, be it full or partial. There's a Notes tab here. You can enter notes about anything you choose, and you can even attach images, invoices, receipts, and so on. So essentially, if you can scan it, take a picture of it, you can attach it. It will take PDFs, JPEGs, PNG files, TIFF files, bitmaps, and GIF files. You can also link a single image or invoice to multiple assets. So if, for example, you order multiple pieces of equipment on a single invoice, you can easily link that image or invoice to all of those assets. In this particular asset, I have an invoice attached as well as an image of the asset. Now let's talk about the book fields down below. These fields that are in bold are all mandatory fields. So whenever you're adding an asset, be it from an import from Excel, or if you're manually adding them in the system, these are fields that must be populated. So you must populate your IRS property type, an acquisition date and place in service date, an acquisition value, depreciation method, and estimated life. There are 52 depreciation methods built in, but you also have the ability to create any kind of custom depreciation methods that you may need. If you are doing bonus depreciation, you'll also need to populate that bonus percentage. All of the data down below that's in blue is all calculated based on the information inserted above here. Now, if you are importing an asset or a group of assets from an Excel spreadsheet and you're populating all of this information, let's say you are migrating from another system or from Excel to using this solution, you can also bring in a beginning date, beginning year to date, and beginning accumulated depreciation. So this would be a way of forcing our system to match the accumulated depreciation as of some specific date. Otherwise, it will simply calculate depreciation based on that place in service date, value, method, and life. You can have a different cost basis between books, and as I stated before, you can actually turn off any of the books that you are not using. There's some great resources built in to actually help you handle the built-in tax rule or handle depreciation for tax. So there's some quick references available. So for example, I can click on the IRS table here, and it's going to show me all of the makers, GDS or ADS life for various types of assets. Additionally, if you want to see what's new in the current release you're in, including any tax rules that have been incorporated, you can go to Help, What's New, and click on Learn More. It is going to show any feature updates as well as tax rule changes included in the current release. So in this particular version I'm in, it is now incorporating all of the changes from the Further Consolidated Appropriations Act of 2020, all of the tax extenders tied to that. It is also reflecting the changes to the Section 179, where that has been an increase by 20,000. So I can easily take a look at all of the rules surrounding the 179, and I can see the tables showing the 179 limits for each fiscal year. I can also look further back, for example, if I'm doing bonus depreciation and I want to review the changes brought about by the TCJA, which are retroactive back to assets placed in service, September 28th of 2017. I can even look up the bonus tables, the new law information, as well as the old law information as a quick reference. So this is just a quick reference resource that will save you having to go out to the IRS website to research any of these tax rule changes for tax. All of this is just here as a quick reference for your use. Now, if you are doing bonus depreciation, there are some pretty helpful tools to help you make changes en masse. So if, for example, you've added assets that you're currently taking 50% bonus and you want to be able to change that to 100% bonus, you can actually do that en masse, not just one asset at a time. So if I go up to depreciation, I can select the 168 allowance switch, and I can change my bonus percentage for any fiscal year. I can do an individual assets, all the assets, or any subset. It will only make the changes to assets that do qualify. So if, for example, this asset was placed in service prior to the September 28th date, it would not change it to 100% bonus. It would actually leave it sitting at 50% bonus, which is what that asset would qualify for based on the tax rules. For the MidQuarter convention switch, I can go up to depreciation, select Maker's convention switch, and I can switch from half year to MidQuarter for any fiscal, for whichever book that I need to. This makes it very easy to make that change. The other mass change I can make in the system, if, for example, I need to change depreciation methods and estimated life for multiple books across multiple assets, there is actually a bulk edit tool. It is going to have me acknowledge I've done a backup, and I can select which books I want to make changes for, which group of assets or all the assets. And I can change either depreciation methods. If I leave it sitting at all, I can change them regardless of what method they're currently using to something specific, such as remaining value over remaining life, or I can select specific depreciation methods and change them to something specific. I can also change estimated life. So I can do either estimated life or depreciation methods, or I could do both. Now, if you go to the next screen, I can now specify which effective dates as far as depreciation current through date I want to be able to use. So I can choose only assets depreciated up to a specific through date, or I can say all assets up to the current depreciation through date. I can also make the change effective back to the placed in service date. And even while doing that, if I do have a beginning accumulated depreciation specified in some assets as of a particular date, by clicking this checkbox, I can tell it to retain that beginning accumulated depreciation info, even though I'm specifying go back to the placed in service date, which typically is going to wipe out all depreciation calculated so far. Now, if I go to the next screen and click Validate, it's going to look at all of the assets that would be touched by these changes, and it will generate a report that's going to show me if I'm doing anything that's against the IRS rules. Now, any result that is a warning, it is essentially saying, I'm going to allow you to make the change, but are you sure you want to do that? Anything that is an error, it's a hard failure that no, you cannot do that. So in this particular case, this warning, because I did select the option of going back to the placed in service date, it is letting me know that this particular asset for tax is fully depreciated, so am I sure I really want to make that change? In the case of the second asset, where I have an error, which is a hard failure, it is telling me here that I'm using Maker's Formula 200 for a depreciation method, and 19 years is not a valid estimated life for tax. And of course, you can use whatever estimated life you want for GAAP. So for my internal book, it's telling me here this is a valid change, and it will check all of the assets that would be touched and generate this report, so I can now go back and make any appropriate changes I need to eliminate these errors and then try the change. Now, let's take a look at a couple of transactions that might be needed on a regular basis, disposals or transfers. I can easily come in and dispose of a single asset, choose a disposal date, can be current date, future dated, past, whatever I need to, and I can do whatever type of disposal I want. So I can do sale, abandonment, casualty, like-kind exchange, and so on. If I'm doing a full disposal, I will simply ignore this partial disposal option and populate any cash proceeds, expense of sale, or non-cash, and simply select calculate, and now it's going to calculate my gain loss across all of the books. Now this particular asset, I'm taking 100% bonus for tax, and I'm doing straight line depreciation for my internal book. That's why my net book value is 0 for tax and 1226 for my internal book. It will, of course, calculate the gain loss accordingly. If I took a tax credit, I can actually see the recapture calculated here. Now, I can individually choose to defer or not recognize this for any of the books individually. I can preview the disposal worksheet before committing to this disposal, and if you are taking 168 allowance or Section 179, I did want to point out here, if you take a look at the actual worksheet, that your 179 or 168 allowance is going to be factored in your disposal. If I did take a 179 deduction on this particular asset, you would see that recapture calculated here, as well as any tax credit I took would be recaptured here. All of the reports in the solutions are exportable to Crystal Reports, PDF, CSV format, standard Excel, Excel data only, and multiple other formats. So if everything looks fine, I can go ahead and say OK and complete my disposal. Now, since I'm doing a full disposal, this is taking me to the Transactions tab. My status has changed to Disposed, and it's showing me here I've done a full disposal by sale, my cash, non-cash, and expense of sale info, or I can actually pull up the actual transaction or worksheet and export or print this as needed. If you go to the main asset details, since I've done a full disposal, you'll see everything is grayed out because this asset is now disposed and it's no longer depreciating. If you go to the History tab, and it will show you here that the asset was disposed, it is going to also show you the date done in the system separate from the actual disposal date or gain loss calculation date. And if you're using the multi-user version, it will show you as well who did this. It's also going to capture your cash, non-cash expense of sale information. And even if the transaction is reversed, this data will remain here. So for example, if someone gave you the wrong asset information to dispose of, you need to be able to undo this. I can simply go to the Transactions tab, delete last transaction, and it's like it never happened. If I go back to the main asset details, everything has returned to the way it was. And if I go to the History tab, it did not erase the disposal information. All of that is still here. It simply creates a new entry that the last transaction was reversed, when it was done, and who did it. Now, you can limit who can do disposals, who can do transfers, and a variety of other things. So if you need to set different access capabilities based on user, you can actually create more restricted profiles, assign users to that, and select what limitations you want to impose, such as who can do disposals, transfers, run depreciation, set or clear period closes, even what reports they can run. So you have quite a bit of flexibility with what limitations you do impose. Now, of course, there may be occasions you need to dispose of multiple assets at once. I can search based on any of the fields. So, for example, if I want to find all of my Dell computers, I can search based on that, and I can select all, for example, or I can simply use my Shift key or Control key and select some subset of these assets where I can now do a bulk disposal or bulk transfer of all of these in one shot. Now, keep in mind, when disposing of assets as a group, and you can still do sale, abandonment, taxable exchange, and so on, any cash, non-cash, or expensive sale are going to get evenly distributed across all of these assets that are being disposed at once. So it takes away the granularity of being able to say, this one I'm getting $5,000 in cash proceeds, this one's $1,000, so on. But it will calculate their gain losses independently because their current net book values could be different. I can also do bulk transfers. So if you do need to transfer assets between departments, divisions, and so on, or even between companies, you have the ability to do that. Now, the other type of disposal you may need to do would be a partial disposal. So if, for example, you have some group of assets, let's say 10 computers as a single line item, you need to dispose of 2 of them, you can dispose of the value of those 2. So if those 10 computers were $1,000 each, you're going to dispose of 2 of them, you would be disposing of a $2,000 portion. Now, the same is true if you have dissimilar cost items as a single line item, you need to dispose of some portion. You can absolutely do that as long as you can identify the value of the portion you want to dispose. So here is an asset that I have already done a partial disposal of some sort. You can see the status is partial. If I go to the Transactions tab, you'll see here that there's actually 3 previous partial disposals where I disposed of a $12,000 in one occasion, $5,000 another, $7,450 on another, and the remaining value is still being used to continue to calculate depreciation going forward. So I certainly could come in and do another partial disposal on this asset. And the difference, of course, here, I can still do sale, abandonment, whatever type of disposal, is that for a partial disposal, I'm going to say yes here and just hit tab, and now I can enter the value of the portion that I want to dispose of. So let's say I'm going to dispose of $3,500. It's going to calculate the remaining amount that will be used to calculate depreciation. So all of my cost basis across each book would be reduced by that $3,500 disposal amount. I'd recommend putting in a description of whatever you may be disposing of, so that you can easily search and find a particular transaction if you have multiple partials on the same group of assets. Going to go ahead and say OK there. Put in my cash proceeds, throw in some expense of sale, calculate my gain loss as before, and go ahead and say OK. And now you'll see there is a 4th transaction displayed here. So giving me a total of 4 partial disposals on the same line item. And now you can see it's pretty easy for me to identify them by transactions because I actually have a description here. So if I do want to review a particular transaction, I can see the one I'm looking at here, dispose of Part V, is the transaction dated 2/17/20. I can select that and actually pull up the worksheet or transaction, export it, print it, whatever I need. Now, if I go to the main asset details, you'll see all of my cost basis across all of my books have been reduced by that $3,500 disposal amount. And if I go to the History tab, just to show you how it captures the information differently with a partial. So you'll see here a partial disposal was completed, but it's also going to capture what your book values changed from and to. So they have all been reduced by that $3,500 disposal amount. and it creates a single entry with all of the books showing that change. Now, if I had a different cost basis for tax than book, for example, it would actually list those separately. And just as before, I can reverse this transaction. Simply go to the Transactions tab, delete last transaction, and it's like it never happened. Go back to my asset details, and you can see here all of my values have now gone back to the previous state of $20,928. Okay. Now, the other transaction I want to talk about is transfers. I can easily transfer an individual asset or multiple assets at once. So I can select transfer an asset, choose my transfer date. I can do it within the current company, and I can set the default field I want updated. So for example, I'm telling mine to use the location name, and in this case, if I were to transfer between store number 2 and store number 4, you'll see that field will be updated. But I can also additionally say yes here to edit general information fields and change any other field that I may choose and leave a description. So if, for example, I'm keeping track of building numbers, room numbers, and so on, I could change that information here. If that new department is under a different GL account, I can change all of that information as part of my transfer. Now, I can also transfer as disposal, which some people choose to do if they're transferring between 2 different companies or legal entities. So if I'm going between companies, I can select that and transfer between companies, change any other information I want. I can also transfer as a disposal if I want this transaction to be reflected as a disposal on the company it's leaving and a transfer in on the company it's going to. So I can now populate for cash proceeds, fair market value, or current net book value, whatever the case may be, and it will calculate my gain loss and the company it's leaving as a disposal and transfer in to the new company. Now, let's talk about adding assets into the system. Assets can be added via import from a CSV file or standard Excel file. And part of that import process, there's actually an import wizard. You will be able to map the individual columns of data from your spreadsheet and point them to the appropriate fields in the database. So you'll typically be doing this during your initial data migration, where you're going to bring all of these assets in. Or if you have a high volume of asset addition on a monthly basis, certainly this would be a good way to do it, where you can import hundreds or thousands of assets at once. On a routine basis, you certainly can easily add assets in the system. So I can simply select add an asset, and since I've customized all of my fields, created my smart list with all of my account numbers, my location information, sure, it is easy enough to point and click and add assets that way. Now, I can also create templates, which would make this process much easier. So that way, if I create templates for the different types of assets that I have, I can easily use a template and make this process much, much faster. So for example, if I'm going to add a new computer, I have multiple computer templates, select the one that I want, and I can select apply template. In my particular template, I'm saving a description, the correct GL account for that particular department or location, the correct asset class, but more importantly, I'm populating property type, depreciation methods, and estimated life for all of my active books for that type of assets. So in order to add this asset, the only thing I would need to do is actually go ahead and give it an acquisition date, a place and service date. I can give it a value, which I can then push out across all of the books. So for example, apply book defaults, and I can go ahead and populate things such as serial numbers or anything that may be unique. If I'm going to be assigning an asset ID, I could certainly do that as well. I can go ahead and save it. Of course, I can attach images or invoices if I have that information available for this asset. So let's say I'm going to add an invoice, an image of the asset, and I can certainly attach invoices or anything else I need. Save it. And if I got multiple of these in, so for example, if I've got 20 of these in, I don't have to do this 20 times. I can do the first one and save it and hit replicate asset and select the number of copies I want made, and it's simply going to make copies of this. In my case, if I did 19, that would give me 20 total. So it makes that process very easy. Everything is now here ready for this to start depreciation. The next time I run depreciation, this asset would then be picked up and start depreciating. So it makes the process very smooth by really incorporating using templates. Now, let's talk about a couple of other tools that might be helpful. You can run depreciation for whatever period in time you choose. So I'm going to run depreciation in my particular scenario here for my fiscal year end for 2019. And then I'm going to go into actually generating some of the reports. I can have it run my depreciation expense report at the same time that I run depreciation. You can run depreciation for any period of time you want, any subset of the assets you choose to. Now, there's also a period close function. So if, for example, you've closed out your year end or quarter, whatever the case may be, you want to lock the books, I can actually choose to do so across all the assets or any groups or subset that I created for any books that I created and for whatever date I choose, which is essentially going to protect my data from changes being made. Now, if you need to go back beyond the period close date to make changes for some reason, you would first need to come in and clear the period close for the assets you want to be able to make those changes to. And you can limit who can actually set or clear period closes. Now, one other tool that's also pretty helpful here, it does have a built-in Audit Advisor. So if, for example, you want to be able to see how you've been doing things and the solution throughout the year, you can run this at various points. So what this is going to do, it's going to actually create an exception for anything that is a potential red flag for you to get audited. So I'm actually going to run mine back in the past to a previous fiscal year where I know I do have some issues with Section 179. Now, it is going to check all of the assets in the company, and it is going to create an exception where it sees any potential issues. So let's focus on the one that's been triggered for the Section 179 dollar limit. You can see here it creates an exception in red. It's going to identify the issue that it sees. So in my particular case, it's telling me that I'm exceeding the 1 million limit for fiscal 2018. It's also going to recommend a resolution where it's identifying that in this particular scenario, I am exceeding the Section 179 limit for that fiscal significantly. I'm actually taking 5.675 million deduction when that fiscal year you only allowed 1 million. Now, it's going to create a group where any assets that are triggering that exception are actually going to show up in that group, which makes it very easy for me to identify the assets that are generating this exception, and I can take the appropriate action. So if I go back to my asset list view, you'll see it's now created two groups because it sees two separate issues. But for our purposes, I just want to focus on the Section 179 exception. So if I select that group, these are all of the assets that are triggering that exception where I am taking a Section 179 limit. So if I go into the first one, you'll see here I'm actually taking a $675,179 deduction, and on all the others, I'm actually taking a $700,000 deductions. So individually, I'm below the $1 million limit for the year, but combined, I'm taking more than 5 times the limit. So I would simply need to come in and make that correction. And once I've made the corrections, I can rerun that Audit Advisor to ensure that those triggers are no longer there. and that everything is actually working as it should. Now, I'm going to go into some of the reporting so we can take a look at some of the important reports that you may need to run on a monthly basis, quarterly basis, or certainly at year end. There are many standard reports built in, and you do have the ability to customize these reports. So let's run the depreciation expense report, and I'm going to run this just for tax. I can run it for multiple books if I choose to. It will simply run those on separate tabs. Now, these reports can be sorted and subtotaled in any way you choose. In this particular version, I ran it unsorted just to show what data is captured in the depreciation expense report. Now, if you take a look at these columns of data, make this a bit bigger, you'll see it's capturing my in-service date, my acquisition value, method, my 168 or 179 allowance is also captured here, my depreciable basis, prior depreciation through date, current depreciation through date. So in my case, you can see I ran depreciation in November. My next run was December. So my depreciation, this run column, is capturing 1 month's depreciation. We'll capture your prior accumulated depreciation as well as your current accumulated depreciation info. And we'll have all of your totals on the last page, less any disposals or transfers. Now, as I mentioned, you could tweak these reports in various ways. So I could come in and select format reports, and I can sort and subtotal this in any way I choose by any of the fields. So this is another reason to think about what fields do you want to customize in the general information, because I can actually use them as a sorting mechanism. So I could sort and subtotal this report up to 3 layers deep. So I could do a location, for example, and maybe below that asset class, and maybe below that GL asset account, I can slice and dice this however I choose and save it as a custom report, which is going to save that change that I've made. So if you take a look here in the report list, anything with a white notebook symbol next to it is a standard version. All of these you see in yellow are the customized versions that I changed something. Now, in addition to being able to change the sort order of the reports, if I have the custom reporting feature, I can actually customize the reports further, where I can go in, add or remove different columns of data. In this particular one, I added current net book value as a column of data, told it to give me a summation at the end, and even changed the orientation. I could also change the header and footer information here, so I get quite a bit of flexibility in what I can change in these reports. In addition to that, the custom reporting feature is going to give me a fully integrated version of SAP Crystal Reports, where I can build any type of ad hoc report I need from scratch. But I could also, of course, start with an existing report, export that out to Crystal Reports, and further customize it. This particular report is ad hoc report built from scratch, but because I have access to every field in the database, I can literally build anything I want, add formulas, and so on. Now, let's look at some of the other standard reports that would be needed. A disposal report is something that may be needed at various points throughout the year, or maybe even at year end. You can run it for any date range you want, and you can certainly look at any subset of the assets you choose to. It is not depreciation dependent, so it's simply going to capture any disposal, be it full or partial, during the span of time that you selected. Now, let's take a look at what information is captured here. So it's going to capture the system number and asset ID, a description, in-service date, and disposal date. Under acquired value, this is going to capture actually the disposal amount. So in the case of a full disposal, it's going to be the full acquisition value. In the case of a partial disposal, as demonstrated here in system number 372, this utility trailer, I have 2 separate partial disposals done on different dates. One of these is for $7,450, the other one for $5,000. So think of acquired value as a disposal amount. In the case of a full disposal, it's going to be the full acquisition value. In the case of a partial, the portion that you dispose. It's also going to capture your current accumulated depreciation, your net proceeds, your gain loss adjusted basis, right, as well as your realized gain loss calculation from that disposal transaction. It is also going to capture anything that was recognized or deferred here as well. And this also can be sorted and subtotaled in any way you choose. The transfer report is another one if you are doing transfers that you might take a look at. And this also is not depreciation dependent. You can simply look at transfers during any time frame that you choose. Now, what I want to demonstrate here is that when you do a transfer in the system, it is going to stop depreciation of the asset at the time of transfer, and it's going to continue depreciating exactly where it left off. So if you notice here, this particular asset went from store number 4 to the bakery. Note my current accumulated depreciation of $693, and it's going to start depreciating exactly where it left off under the new department or division, wherever I transferred it to. Now, let's talk about some of the tax reports that are included in the solution as standard. You can actually generate a fileable 4562. Going to run this for my last fiscal. And of course, in our annual tax update, this report is actually updated so that you have the correct tax year form for your 4562. And since it's an actual fileable form, you can simply export this out to a PDF file, for example. And let's scroll through it, and you'll have both pages. And of course, you'll also need the worksheet attachment with all of the details. Now, another report that will be needed is going to be the report that you'll want to use to reconcile that 4562, and that is the tax expense report. If you are doing Section 179 or 116 allowance, it's a quick way of seeing your totals. So you can actually run this to see where you are year to date with your 179 deduction, but you'll certainly want to use it for your year end for reconciling that 4562, since it does capture both your 168 and 179 expense. All of your totals will be on the last page, and you can certainly run this in subtotals only as opposed to full detail, which I just did. And this, of course, can also be sorted in any way you choose. We do have a report here that captures Section 199A. And you can also export, like I said, any of these reports to multiple formats and save them locally or push them out directly to a printer. And if you do need to run multiple reports, I'll actually show you that shortly, how you can run multiple reports and actually push this data out to a printer or to a local folder or network folder. So here is the Section 199A report. And all of your totals on the last page. Another report you'll also need is probably going to be the sale of property or 4797 worksheet. Also going to run this for my 2019 fiscal. This is going to break everything down into correct section property. Your ordinary gain losses will actually be on the second page, 1245, 1250 property, and so on. ordinary gains and losses. And that should be everything needed for the 4797. There's other standard reports such as net book value, additions report, capturing all of your additions year to date. This is one that you may run on a regular basis as well, so let me actually run that one. I'm going to have it summarize the assets with no activity. This one is, of course, going to capture anything added through your current depreciation through date. So this will be a rolling total throughout the year as you add new assets. Going to capture what account it is, your acquisition cost and totals, but it also will capture transfer ins, transfer out, current year disposals, and your ending cost data, and all of your totals. There's also a fixed asset summary report. And this will capture things like your beginning cost, ending cost data, and some other useful information that you may need for year end. Beginning cost, ending cost, your prior accumulated depreciation, total accumulated depreciation. And it will have your totals on the last page. And again, you can sort and subtotal this in any way you choose. For general ledger posting, this will be tied to your current depreciation through date. And you can export this, of course, to multiple formats. So if you're using a non-Sage ERP system, for example, you need to push this out to a CSV file or standard Excel file. You have multiple formats. You can export it and import it into that system. Custom integration is available, but if you are using a Sage ERP system such as Sage 100, Sage 300, Sage 500, this will actually format this report and post it to those systems. You can actually drill down if you need to look at the individual details. For those of you using one of our systems, you can see there are links to Sage 300, Sage 100, Sage 500, and so on. And there's also integration with Sage Intacct. Now, one of the interesting things about the integration with Sage Intacct for journal entry posting, you'll simply need to choose which company you're using and your depreciation calculation through date. And when you set this up, you can actually define the various dimension mapping that you may need for Sage Intacct. And once you've configured this, it will be saved. So for example, your location, department, whatever dimensions you are actually using, and it'll save those settings, the path to where you want the file placed, and it will actually format the file and save it in that location where Intacct will be able to retrieve it, and it's properly formatted for Sage Intacct with those appropriate dimensions. In the case of Sage 100, Sage 100 has the ability to pull the data directly from the depreciation module here, and it will also output the file for these other Sage ERP systems, as well as Microsoft Dynamics. If you are using a tax program, we do integrate with CCH Pro Systems FX for tax. So those tax reports I ran could be fed directly into that particular system. Let me go ahead and reopen my company and go back to the reporting sections. There are projection reports built in as well. There is an annual projection that will show full year depreciation up to 99 years out, and I can actually look at multiple books side by side. And let's say I'm going to look at 5 years here, and I can start from my current fiscal or any future fiscal, and this will actually show me my full year depreciation for multiple years, looking as far out as 99 years. If you need to see projections in a more granular fashion, there is actually a monthly projection report, which I can look at any fiscal I choose, future year, a current year. So let's go out to 2021, let's say. And it's going to show you this broken down in a monthly period expense and year-to-date type format. And in this particular report, I'm able to drill down and look at the individual asset details, and I can sort and subtotal this in any way I choose by location, asset class, and so on. So I could actually drill down into any particular period, see the individual asset details. Now, you can also place asset and service out into the future. So if, for example, I knew I had an upcoming project that's going to result in, $500,000 worth of assets being created, I can create a few dummy assets, place them in service in the future, and this would actually pick them up and calculate them as well. Now, if you need to run multiple reports at once, you can create batches. I can choose which reports I want to run so that when I run a batch, let's say a month-end batch, for example, I can have them sent out to a printer. I can also have them save these reports out to a folder, and I can actually push these reports out in multiple formats. So I can do PDF, Crystal reports, Excel, the older new version of Excel, and send those directly out to a folder, for example. Now, there's multiple other resources for training built into the system. So if, for example, you do need to get some on-demand training, there's instructor-led training as well. But let's say I'm not sure about something I'm doing in the system. Let's say I'm in the middle of doing a disposal. Anywhere you see one of these graduate caps, you can simply click on that, and it's going to take you out and show you any available on-demand training as well as any available instructor-led training or what instructor-led curriculum covers that topic. So in this case, I see that there are on-demand training videos available for how to do disposals or how to do partial disposals, and both of these are covered in intermediate depreciation training module, which is an instructor-led course. There's also an assistance center that is searchable where I can learn how to do many things in the system. So there's a lot of great resources built in.